Hey homeschool friends, welcome back to the channel. So I'm so excited about today's video. Today's video is a review. It's basically my thoughts after using Sonlight curriculum for an entire year. So you guys, Sonlight has always been my dream curriculum and it still currently is. So you can tell by that statement that this is going to be a positive curriculum review. But there was always just something about the Sonlight curriculum that always drew me in. I would get their catalogs and I'd look through all the books and I really wanted to use it. But it is a pretty expensive curriculum. But I decided to purchase it last spring, so spring of 2021. And it honestly felt like this huge leap of faith to just try it out, to know if it was actually going to work for our family. It was so expensive. It felt like I couldn't just be like, oh, well, that didn't work 1 month in and try something else. It just felt like a big commitment, if you will. And so I was a little bit worried about Sonlight, but never fear, it has been the best curriculum, the best fit for our family. So in this video, I want to walk you through how Sonlight went for our family over this past year. In specific, we use Sonlight HBL-K with the History Bible Literature. So I'm going to give you my final thoughts on that program. So hi, my name is Angie. Welcome to the channel if you are new here, or welcome back if you've been coming for a while. So for those of you who have been following my channel for a while, you have heard me talk all the time about Sonlight this past year. I included it in all of my monthly homeschool update videos, which I will link above if you are at all interested in the HBL-K program, because every month I talked about what we were liking, what we weren't liking. I reviewed all of the read alouds as we were reading them. So that could be a good resource for you if you're thinking about picking up this program. But for those of you who watch my channel regularly, you've heard me talk about Sonlight. And really my in a nutshell review is we loved it. We absolutely loved it. I have never loved a curriculum so much. I've never felt like a curriculum fits my family and my style as much as Sonlight has. Now, I already knew I liked literature-based curriculum. We loved Build Your Library, Torchlight, and I made a video about why I switched from Build Your Library and Torchlight to Sonlight. But for me, Sonlight really took it to the next level of adding Bible to the mix, as well as giving me an amazing instructor's guide. You guys, this thing, it's huge and it's so full of so many questions and guides and what to read on what days, and it can make some people overwhelmed. And I know that, but not me. That is exactly what I needed. I needed not only the hand holding, but it's almost like I needed more than I could use so I could pare down. I'm just not in a season of like building it myself or like having to like beef it up, if you will. And so Sonlight really provided that. I did not have to do any extra research or anything. I had it all in the instructor's guide. So that is probably one of the things I just loved about Sonlight the most. But let's walk through the whole curriculum. So in this video, I'm talking about the History Bible Literature, so the HBL-K. And we also used the Science A last year, but I have recently made a video about how I liked the science program, and I will link that above. But even since making that video, I still love the science program. And we are going to continue to use a lot of Sonlight products next year. We're going to move on to the next HBL-B. So go ahead and see my family subjects curriculum video if you're at all interested in some of that content. So what we're using for science, as well as History Bible Literature for next year. Additionally, we're going to try out Sonlight Language Arts for next year. So clearly we love it, but I digress. I was talking about the HBL, and that's what this video review is about. So HBL-K. So it's the kindergarten level. It's geared for kids 5 to 6 years old, which I'll get back to that in a second because I have some thoughts on the age range. But let me go through each of section: History, Bible, and Literature. And I'm going to start with history because it's the first letter. So history was covering American history. We loved this part of the program, but it probably was the area of the curriculum that we struggled the most in. And that's okay. Really what it came down to is I feel like the material was geared a little bit advanced. In other words, like it says 5 to 6, but I think it's more appropriate, especially the history, and pretty much only the history section would I say this about. I'd say it is probably better for a 7 to 8 year old, because my son, who was 7.5 at the beginning of the school year, did really well with this program. My daughter, who's 6, she didn't understand it quite as well as he did, but it was helpful just because she had him to kind of interpret it for her. And so I think she still learned plenty. But if it was just her, I think she would have really struggled with some of the resources in the history section. So here are the books that we went through for the history section. I'll hold them up here. But there actually was two main spines, and they're here, these ones. So these are called the Heroes and Happenings books. And I really like these, and I feel like these grew on my kids as the year went on. Like they were a little much at the beginning, and then by the end they were tracking with the whole thing. And what I mean by a little much, it just felt like a little too much reading. Like for instance, I'll hold this one up. So this one is about Christopher Columbus, and so that's the first section of reading. And then it's a 2-page spread. You can see all that. You can stop and read the boxes, but you don't have to. We really didn't at the beginning of the year. We did more at the end. And then it's another 2-page spread. Now, that was 5 pages, and I'd say that was on the high end. Some of them were more like 4 pages, but that's a decent amount of reading. And when it comes to history, it's a little hard to understand some of those concepts at these ages with that much text. Now, I think it was well written and very interesting. So it wasn't boring reading, it's just hard to grasp concepts. And then when you add the fact that it's 5 pages, it can be hard for the kids to track, or at least that's what I felt like my kids were struggling a little to track with that. But what I love about Sonlight is, so yes, it had these spine books, these kind of main books we use, but then it had a ton of picture books. And so it had all of these, and then we could go a little bit further into things like this is like the wagon train and the American pioneers. These are the Pilgrims. This is the Revolutionary War of George versus George. The very first Americans, so Native Americans, Lewis and Clark. This was colonial times, and then Civil War. So you definitely hit all the high points, a lot of important historical events within this time frame. What I would like to say though is I felt like it was very age appropriate. So like say when we got to World War II, it covered it, but it covered it from like an angle that was very approachable to the kids. Like there was a part where it covered like the Dutch relief, and then this part it talked about a ballet, the Appalachian Spring, which was all this was happening during the time of World War II, but it wasn't really focused on the war or the fighting or the conflict itself. It was more focused on aspects of American history that were adjacent to World War II, if that makes sense, which I thought was a really good thing because it put that peg on like their timeline, so they understood this is when World War II happened, but they didn't need all the details that they will be getting later. So I did really like that. I wanted to mention that. But as for the books that were my kids' favorite books, the ones that they picked out after the whole year that they just liked the best from the history section, they really liked these ones. You wouldn't want to be an American pioneer, and you wouldn't want to be a Civil War soldier. They just found these really funny. Like there is definitely some more interesting humor and some fighting and things like that, but I feel like they really found these funny and really enjoyed these. As for the book that I probably liked the most and learned the most from, but I would say it was way too over their head, was this book. So George versus George. I feel like my son kind of understood it. Again, it's some of these things are just hard to understand, like taxation and things like that. It's just kind of hard for kids to wrap their head around to begin with. But this book was a little bit advanced, and the hard part about that is it came kind of near the beginning of American history, and so they had an even harder time because they were younger, and the history that was near the end of the year, they understood a lot better. But those were their favorites. And then for some other stuff that went along with history, which I love this aspect of the history program. So it covered timeline as well as maps. So for maps, what Sonlight comes with, so in the big instructor's guide, there's a foldable map here, which I should just get this out. But you pull it out, you keep it in your instructor guide. So I would keep it in my working binder, the part where I just have a few weeks of my instructor's guide, and I'd have that map. And what was nice is within the instructor's guide, it would point out a map location, say like Boston for the Boston Tea Party. It would point that out on the map. It'd be like, well, E4. And so my daughter loved to do this. My then 6-year-old, she would love to find the E and the 4 and find where Boston was. And what I liked about it, so that taught where it was, but then I liked to take it a little bit further, which is I think the intention of the program, is that Sonlight comes with these foldable, markable maps, and these are huge. Like, They're very big. There's the world on one side, there's the United States on the other side. And what was great is that my kids would find it on the small map, and then I'd be like, actually, can you now find it on the big map of the United States? And it would just kind of teach them context, if you will, so they could have a better understanding of where things were happening. So I liked using the maps. The other aspect of the history was the timeline. So there is these timeline books. My kids really like these. So it comes with stickers, which I can't really show you the sticker packs, but I can show you the stickers in the books. And so they would put their stickers in the books. And then my son often liked to color his stickers. And I can't remember where I got this tip, but I love it, is to trace around the figure, because there are a lot of historical events or people who will cross different levels. So for instance, we'll come back to American history in HBL-D and E, but even like World War II had a sticker. And obviously we're gonna cover World War II during other levels of Sonlight. And so every time you get to the World War II sticker, you would just color around it to show what level it was in. So in his case, he colored red for HBL-K. And so that way he could keep his timeline going and it wouldn't get too full, because there are repeat stickers as you go through the levels. But I loved that. They really enjoyed putting their stickers in there, and it was also a good way to review stuff. We could look back on a sticker and be like, do you remember this person? Do you remember who Alexander Hamilton was? And I could just ask the different questions like that, and it would be fun to pull it back because they're coloring that picture and things like that. So yes, the history, I really did like it. I do feel it was a little advanced, and I'm really glad that I did it with older kids, which I had heard that the program was a little bit advanced. So that's the history. So that's HB, so Bible for B, and the Bible. Okay, let me grab it. So these were our two main resources for Bible. This Bible for Children 1 year, as well as this CD for the memory work. And I'll be honest, I stopped doing this about halfway through the year, only because it just became a little too much. There was a lot going on in our life, and I just couldn't make this happen, and I couldn't find a good spot for it. But I kind of regret that, and I wish I would have done a better job. And that is very much on my list for this upcoming year, is to do the Bible memory verses better, because we're doing another level of Sonlight and there are more verses to memorize. So we'll just try again. We'll try again. But as for the Bible, I really liked this. I thought it was an excellent resource. And it is a Bible in a year kind of thing. So they're all labeled like January 23rd and June 4th. And if you do the math, we only did the 4-day program. And so there's only 144 days and 365 days in a year. So obviously you either have to double up to finish this book by the end, which is what the instructor's guide instructed you to do. But we didn't do that. We just read 1 day at a time. We were able to go through the story. We were able to do these remember, discover, apply sort of sections at the end of each reading, so we could kind of talk through the passage to make sure they were understanding it, or sometimes I just have them simply narrate back what they heard, and then we could talk a little bit about application with them as well. So I really enjoyed this resource. I thought it was an excellent one. I thought it was perfect for 5- and 6-year-olds. So that was the Bible part of HBL. So literature. Oh, the books, you guys, the books. I loved the books. And so here's my stack. Here's my stack of the books we read. And actually a few of these we did not read because we've already read them. But let me go through and then I will tell you what my kids' favorites were and what my favorites were. So these are not in any order, but I'm just going to go through them. So Heartwood Hotel, Just Dance, Roxy and the Hooligans, Lulu and the Dog from the Sea, The Boxcar Children, Violet Mackerel's Brilliant Plot, The World According to Humphrey, The Adventures of the South Pole Pig, Little House in the Big Woods, Dolphin Adventure and Dolphin Treasure, and then A Grain of Rice, The Silver Balloon, and My Father's Dragon. And so there were also a couple of other extra ones. There was a Richard Scary Please and Thank You book about manners, which we actually really liked. Then there was a book about feelings, which we really liked as well. And then there was the poetry book, which my kids loved. There are so many good poems in here. So this is The Llama Who Had No Pajamas. We loved this one. And poetry had its own schedule in the instructor's guide. So it wasn't necessarily part of the read alouds. We kind of read it throughout the whole entire year, which I just loved. So how did we do on our literature? So I would say we were kind of constantly ahead because my kids would want to read more. And if we had the time, I would read extra chapters, and then I would just mark it off in our instructor guide as we read it, and then we would just be ahead. And what I do love about Sonlight, which at first I didn't understand when I was putting together my big binder, is that the notes and the questions for the read alouds were in the very back. And I was like, why aren't they just on the week that they're assigned? But this is why. Because if you get ahead, then your questions are in the wrong week. And so what I always did is I would just take the questions out of the back of the instructor guide, and I would use that as my bookmark. So I'd fold it in half, I'd put it where we were in our book, and that way when I was getting to certain chapters, I could look ahead at what those questions were, and I could either use those specific questions or I could use similar questions and draw out some discussion with my kids. So I loved doing that. So that is a good Sonlight hack if you haven't heard of that, because I really enjoyed pulling out those questions and just tucking them in our current read aloud. But as for our favorites, I have a couple. My son really liked these ones, the Dolphin Adventure, Dolphin Treasure books. These were one of the first ones read in the year, so they were a great way to start out the school year. And then both my kids loved the Heartwood Hotel and Humphrey, so The World According to Humphrey. Both of them loved these books. And then the last book we read was also a favorite of theirs, which is The Adventures of the South Pole Pig. So I just loved all these. There was a few we did not read. We did not read Little House in the Big Woods only because we read it during Build Your Library, and we did not read My Father's Dragon only because that was one of the first chapter books I ever read to my kids when they were like 4 and 5 years old, and they loved it. And so it's one that we knew of, and they've since listened to all the audiobooks in that trilogy, so I did not need to read it again, but we just loved all of the books in this program. So that is really the end of my review for Sonlight HBL-K. We loved it. There's not much else I can say. There were a few things I had to adjust, but they were not a big deal in comparison to how much I loved it. The IG notes were invaluable. The books were amazing. And I'm just really excited to get to the next level with my kids. So let me know down below your thoughts on Sonlight. Do you have any questions for me? Do you have any thoughts? Have you used it? I would love to know your guys' thoughts and opinions. So let me know down below. And otherwise, give the video a thumbs up if you love Sonlight and love curriculum reviews, and consider subscribing to the channel if you would like to. Otherwise, I will see you guys in the next homeschool video. Okay guys, take care.